is brought to you by the Corn School, Farm Safety Roundup, and Wheat Pete's Word. Every Wednesday, Peter Wheat Pete Johnson answers your top agronomy questions in this dynamic podcast, covering soil health, cover crops, planting, herbicides, and so much more. Have a question? Leave him a message at 1-888-746-3311, send him a tweet at Wheat Pete, or email him at pjohnson@realagriculture.com. Find Wheat Pete's Word wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube and at wheatpete.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and we broke records today here in Ontario, in the area that I'm in. I believe the Humidex was well over 40 by 10 in the morning, and so it has been a beautiful sunny day. But oh my gosh, I am a grouchy Lyndsey because, of course, I'm well adapted for winter, and summer's tough. But it is a great reminder of the wonderfulness of winter and this balance of very hot summer. I would love to know where things are at, where you are. We've got some great comments already in the chat about where the crop is at. I think I just saw Jason Vogt on Twitter posting about soybeans already flowering in southern Manitoba. So we'll have some questions about that. As always, though, for this show, if you collect those CEU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. Let us know you took in the show and we'll get you those credits. Also tonight, very exciting, this episode qualifies as a knowledge sharing event. So if you've got off-CAF funding here in Ontario and you are looking for a nitrogen management KSE, tonight does qualify. And so at the end of the show, please remind me, everyone, if I don't, if I forget, that we'll put the email up so you can claim that KSE event as well. So we've got lots of questions already rolling in. Tonight's conversation, yes, is going to be all about nitrogen and Sidedress timing and just nitrogen management in general. And so I shall bring in my guests for the show. We've got a brand new guest, Adam Funk from Borderline Agriculture in the Red River Valley of Manitoba. Hello, Adam.
Hi.
And Colin Elgie with the, I wrote it down, Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness, also known as OMAFA. Did I get it right, Colin?
You got that better than I do most times.
Okay. See, I got it. Okay. Colin, of course, in Southern Ontario. So let's start, of course, with where things are at. This is the show as close to the summer solstice as we could get it because it's on Monday nights. It's been an interesting growing season here in Ontario. Colin, maybe I'll start with you. I actually played on today's radio show. I played your segment with Bern Tobin about Sidedress decisions on corn and how we had a very cool May. So how have the last few weeks gone when it comes to June?
Well, we're starting to catch up anyways. It is completely disgusting outside today. And if you were to be outside, if you somehow wanted to go lay in the field beside the crops, you could probably hear them growing. We've had some major growth in the last week or so. We've got some sunshine finally and some heat that's kicking things into overdrive, but it's varied across the landscape depending whether you planted corn in mid-April or right near the end of May, and it's all over the place, but overall this weather is helping it along very nicely.
We have, I would say, so I'm just west of Ottawa. The corn looks actually really good. And you're right. I think I did hear it growing today. It loves this heat and sunshine, and we had rain just a few days ago, so that's certainly going to help. The soybeans, though, I think Jason's bragging with those flowers on there already because my beans and the beans around here do not look that good. So Adam, you, of course, not far from where Jason Vogt would be. How has the seeding season, planting season gone so far? What are things looking like where you are?
I would say overall things look pretty good considering the conditions we started out with. We were quite cool going into May, and the switch flipped, and we had a week of 35. I think we saw some 37s on my truck or whatever, and we had wind for an entire week, and that dried out everything. So we had 70-kilometer-an-hour winds, 35 degrees, and we had that for a week, and then we went back to cool. So our spring has been quite interesting this year, and our crop is a little stagey because of that. The corn really struggled to come out of the ground after that wind. Areas that were in moisture and were able to hold on to that moisture, they germinated and they came up. And then we have large parts of our cornfields that are 2 to 3 growth stages behind. So I'm not sure at this point, we've tried to spray some products on some of those fields to try and promote growth. But yeah, our corn, I would say, we have some really good fields and we have some really poor fields. So it's been a bit of an interesting spring for us. And we've been cool this last week. Like you were talking heat. Last week
Yeah.
we were warm, but going into this week, we're cool. Today I was 17 degrees at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We were windy.
Oh,
So I was cold in my
I'm
shorts.
yeah, no, I was gonna say I am not a corn crop, everybody. 17 sounds lovely. I'm more like so Peter Johnson has joined the chat. I'm more like his wheat crop, which I will say we've got some wheat and some winter barley around here that this heat is not great timing for them. So sorry about that, but we can't plan all these things. Adam, really neat to hear you, talking about different staging and what you can apply to maybe help things or help the crop through it. That's certainly been sort of a theme of what we've been digging into for the past few episodes of this show. Tonight we're going to focus on nitrogen because I think for many and for many crops, but corn especially, it is just so important, and the timing and the amount and actually having access is just so important. But it does, when you've got a really stagey crop, it does definitely beg the question how much and when. So Colin, we'll set the stage here, sort of following up on if anybody did watch that corn school, which based on the numbers, a lot of people did, about that cool start. What did the numbers tell us as far as what the soil was providing up until that side dress timing, or that we're in it for some people actually still?
Yeah, and so right off the bat, our spring was kind of long and drawn out and cold and not especially wet. And so the thinking was that because of that cool weather, that there's going to be some very low mineralization, uh, likely less than normal. And the tests coming back, some have been like that, but some have actually been higher than normal. I think part of the whole equation too is nitrogen losses. We've probably seen less this spring than we would in a normal spring, just because of the relatively dry weather, relatively cool, so that nitrogen that was applied didn't get lost. But yeah, kind of surprising at some of the test numbers coming back being as high as they are. And yeah, not really sure why they would be say higher than normal, but yeah, in a lot of cases it's kind of a head scratcher.
That's what keeps us all busy, Colin. If it were easy,
That's right.
everybody would do it. Adam, the Red River Valley and Western Canada in general, a little bit different on the nitrogen side in that, a lot of soil tests get done in the fall. But what is your testing regimen? Are you doing tissue testing? Are you doing soil testing for a corn crop? How are you making that decision? What tests are you using to help guide that decision
So,
this time of year?
yeah. So down in our area, most of our soil sampling is done in fall, and we kind of harken back to the sugar beet days. We still do a 2-depth soil test in our area. I would maybe like to change that up a little bit, but I don't think any of my producers would allow me to because they've done that for 30 years and
Mm-hmm.
that's the process. So
That's
we
right.
test so we test the 0 to 6 and then the 6 to 24, and that gives us 2 nitrogen depths. And then generally we are fall applying most of our fertilizer. I have some growers that'll do a 50-50. They'll put 50% down in fall. Others are doing 100% of, a 150 bushel yield goal. And then in season now, what we're doing generally is we do a PSNT test, in inter-row test at V5, V6, and see kind of where our levels are at. And then we make a determination as to what we're going to apply. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the general program there for our corn acres.
So up to the PSNT test, different, but from that point on, sort of similar. But Mark
Yeah.
asks, how much do we trust the PSNT test. So Adam, maybe I'll start with you. How do you feel about this test? What are sort of the parameters for you?
Yeah, so I would say it's not a common test done in our area. I spend a lot of my time, at NDSU further south in the winter learning kind of what they're doing. A lot of what they're doing is more relevant to what we're doing in our southeastern corner of the province, just because we have higher heat units, we have more rain typically than the rest of western Manitoba. I started using that test 7 years ago, and we had a couple dry years, and we went out and we did those tests at the V5, V6 stage, and they came back with extremely high numbers. We used the formula that they recommend to use, and it showed that we did not need to fertilize. We did not fertilize that year just because of how dry we were, and it ended up being a good thing. A lot of guys did fertilize. Nitrogen was expensive. That was coming off of, 21, 22 those years there, and we saved a lot of money. Doing that. So I have a lot of trust in it. And I mean, if we don't trust our soil test values, why do we do them? I always struggle with that too.
So Colin, building off that, is it a test that is more indicative in lower rainfall areas because of that mineralization, or do you trust it as well?
I think, like Adam said, if you're not trusting your soil tests, then what's the point of them? And I think it's something where we often look at the PSNTs and think, well, that doesn't make sense. But the real question is are we using them in the right scenarios and looking at them in the big scheme of things? So if we're pulling a PSNT and looking at the published recommendations that we've got in our agronomy guide, and you've got manure down, you've got clover plowed down before that corn crop, you've got 100 pounds of urea already applied, that recommendation is complete nonsense. The test that you're getting, it's got so many different factors going into play with that nitrate test that we can't use those recommendations. So the key with it is, if you're looking to use just that PSNT to try and make a recommendation off, you've got to have very, very little nitrogen up front. So basically a starter and nothing else. Otherwise, that PSNT still got a lot of value, but it's more on a year by year comparison. So if you manage your fields the same this year as you have last year, as you have the year before, you can take that PSNT and use it to compare over that long term and see, well, am I getting more nitrate than an average year, or more than the past 10 years kind of thing, or am I getting less? And from that, look at your nitrogen rate and kind of adjust up or down from
that. Adam, you mentioned, and Mark's got a question here on the sampling depth. You mentioned that you use the 2 depths, and legacy is a thing. Change is hard, so I get it. But if you could choose, what would you change to as far as sampling depth?
Well, I mean, I don't know. That's a tough question, Lyndsey, because you tell me what kind of weather we're going to have next year, and I'll tell you, what I want to do. But I think what I would like to do is, and I mean, we variable rate sample the majority of the fields that I manage. And I think just for the logistics of soil sampling, it would be nice to go to just a 0 to 12. I've talked to a few agronomists that have gone to that. What I need to do, and I haven't really had the time or sat down and actually figured out how I want to do it, but I would like to do a whole field, 0 to 6, 6 to 24, and then go back, do 0 to 12 and see, are there major differences here? We've benchmarked all of these fields per zone for 10 plus years. So the data has to be good data coming off of that 0 to 12. But I think for the guys doing our sampling, and we always generally are hiring seasonal workers, I think that would help really speed up the process of sampling. And our falls are typically wet, so we're looking for efficiencies in soil sampling. I mean, it's always something where we could speed up that process a bit. So, yeah.
Colin, what's the typical testing that you're doing as far as depth?
Yeah, that 12-inch depth is kind of the standard here in Ontario. A lot of it is just we get that much more precipitation than you do in Manitoba. So really, we want to kind of keep it at that standardized testing depth. in order to keep it consistent year over year and kind of, from a comparison sake, make sure that that nitrogen is kind of in the rooting zone and isn't in that portion of the water table that may leach away.
Right. Okay, so some good comments coming in, because there's a few things we've touched on. And Adam, you mentioned that, pulling those tests in the 1 year where it had been quite dry, and the test really showed, probably sufficient N, and you went with it, you trusted it. But is it hard to make that call? Because I know to maybe apply 0 N, like that seems like a difficult conversation to have. We love N
So
a lot.
yeah, so in that situation, the grower already had 50% of his requirements down from fall. So it wasn't a 0, but
Right.
it was basically telling us that he had put down, 70 pounds of nitrogen and he did not need to apply anymore. I mean,
Right.
that's hard for myself as an agronomist and, the grower to come to terms with, is that reality, or, do we need to do something different? We didn't really have rain after that for the remainder of that growing season. And he was,
It worked.
say if N's $1 a pound, $70 an acre ahead of his neighbor who went out and top dressed and it didn't rain. The
Right.
interesting thing is that fall when we went and sampled, that nitrogen was all still there. Like on those other fields where guys
Right.
went and top dressed, like it didn't even move down. And that's, I guess, the beauty of that 2 depth is we can see it in the 0 to 6, and then we can also see if it's moved down into that 2 foot.
Right.
And oftentimes that'll help us kind of determine our fertilization program as well, because if all the N's sitting in that lower foot, well, then we still generally need to put more up top so that the plant has access
Right.
to it earlier on in the season. So, yeah.
Those really dry years, it was remarkable to see some of the tests come back as to how many nutrients were still there. And
Yeah.
so now, some of those carried over, but some then would be more susceptible potentially to loss. So obviously we want to put our nutrients so that our plant uses it as close to as possible, but that's not always possible if the rain doesn't come. And if I could tell you what it was going to do this season or next, I'd be a badillionaire, and I'm not. So there you go. All right. So Colin, and we've got a good clip on this and a few things to touch on this as well. But same question. I think we come to this one every once in a while when those tests come back, and sometimes they might seem a little wonky, or they're saying there's sufficient N there, we don't need to apply more. Have you ever actually said, you're right, we're not going to apply more? Or is there always just an adjustment, maybe downwards, but not 0?
So I think for the most part, there's very little comfort in applying 0. And so to me, it tends to be that adjustment factor. So that's where I think a lot of the, do we trust the PSNT? I think that's where that comes into play. On the other hand, I absolutely promote every time, if it's recommending 0, to at least put a strip or a block in of 0 just to see what it is. I think in a lot of cases, we're too scared of that 0. And especially if we've got, 100 pounds of nitrogen up front already, that 0 is not going to be a disaster in yield. It's incredibly interesting to see just how much corn you can get off of a strip with 100 pounds of nitrogen or 50 pounds of nitrogen.
And this is actually, it cues up quite nicely. So producer Jay, in just a moment, we'll go to, I think it's clip 2 with Deb Campbell, who was actually on the show last week. Mark's got some questions and Peter's got some comments here as well about the background of potential manure sources or biological sources of nitrogen in field history. Sometimes we can be very surprised by what the field itself provides. Exactly that, Colin. If you don't apply any more, not saying truly 0, but not applying anymore, you can be really surprised by what the soil actually supplies. So producer Jay, let's maybe go to that clip with Deb Campbell. This is from the beautiful year of 2022. It was a good one, everybody. Let's go to that clip.
Let's talk about nitrate testing. I mean, obviously, this year, kind of cool, but not too wet. And we're hearing nitrate tests come back as high as 90 parts per million, in those manure fields, though after cereal rye. How do we assess those numbers?
Yeah. So, nitrogen's tricky in that it's biologically driven and it's spatially different in the field. And one field's history is different from another field's history. So it's complex, right? And we try to make it as simple as we can. But in a lot of cases, going into a field, taking a soil nitrate test is a good point in time to be able to say, this is how much mineralization of nitrogen we have from those organic sources, and use that as part of the piece of the puzzle to put together that overall nitrogen sidedress rate or top-up rate that you think you might need. And tissue tests actually are another good way to assess a plant to say, oh, it's well fed at this point in time. But then we need to have that crystal ball, that future forecast of how much is it going to need to take this to yield, to take this to grain fill. We know we want to maximize grain fill, so that's taking us right through to Labor Day. And so we're trying to forecast this out 3 months basically at a time. We rely on nitrate tests and doing them spatially in a field to be able to get a representative number.
Now, how do we do that, Deb? I mean, obviously, we've got knolls, we've got high slopes, low slopes. You've got your core there. Take us through some tips and how we can get a representative sample.
Well, so to do a nitrate test and to do it well so that you have reasonable confidence in the numbers that you're getting back, you want to take a 12-inch core in the field, so you're going deep. So if you're on some gravels, that can be a little bit challenging. Sometimes you have to go down the same hole twice to be able to be certain you're getting 12 inches deep. This is a beautiful sandy loam in this farm, so no trouble. It's just like butter to put this probe in 12 inches deep. You want to think about how the field's been managed. So if you're on strip till versus, full tillage, if you're running a high nitrogen starter, you maybe want to take a few more probes out of the row versus between the row. And then look at the spatial complexity of the landscapes. So, those low slope positions, maybe higher organic matter, the knolls where your lower organic matter, less moisture holding capacity, all of that comes together to influence your soil nitrate and your mineralization capacity of your field. So we're quite often doing 2, 3, 4 samples in a field based on landscape position, and that's telling us, sort of the differential, if you will, from the low points for mineralization to the optimum points for mineralization. Yeah.
Our sponsors for the Agronomists are the Farm Safety Roundup, Wheat Beats Bird, and the Corn School. Big corn yields demand intense management. From tillage strategies to nitrogen management, hybrid selection, pest management, and more, Real Agriculture's Corn School is a video and podcast series that helps you face every moment of the growing season. The Corn School is made possible by support from BASF and Pride Seeds. Learn more at cornschool.com. All right, so Deb makes some really great points. Adam, I want to go to you first on tissue testing. Where do you use tissue testing in this process of determining how much N is enough, or do you?
We do, at this point, we do not. I basically use tissue testing, to answer questions in the field, in season, but for nitrogen management, we don't use any tissue testing.
Yep, makes sense. Colin, how about you?
Yeah, we're kind of along the same boat. I think it's a valuable tool for figuring out a deficiency, and especially if you've got a kind of a yellow looking plant, it could be any one of a number of things. So tissue test is incredibly valuable for that. Incredibly valuable for determining, whether you should have applied more or right. have enough in there already, but to use a tissue test for a rate recommendation, especially, I don't think we're there yet by any means.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Understanding what tests do and don't do is incredibly important, everybody. They don't do everything, and they have their place. Okay, so one of the points that Deb brought up, though, and Colin, I know we've got some slides from you as well, is the variability within a field and how we manage for it is, I think, a big question, right? So the actual, differences across a field and that variability. So I think it's which slide do you want to go to, Colin? I think it's
We can go to number 2, maybe we'll start with that.
2, I think. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So when we're looking at soil nitrogen supply, one of the biggest things is looking at the yield to really identify how much nitrogen that's actually bringing to the table. And so one of the ways that we've been trying to do this, we've got a project that we're piloting now in Ontario on a number of farms, is essentially taking something that looks like this prescription here, which kind of looks like a small plot research that we'd see at university or the research stations, that kind of thing. But what we're doing is we're using variable rate capable equipment to sidedress these nitrogen blocks into farmers' fields. And so the advantage of that is we're getting a lot of different rates out over kind of a vaster area that's using real farm practices, using your individual management. And with that variable rate application, we're able to pick up a lot of the differences in yield that come from that. And so you'll notice on the rate side of things, this is in gallons per acre because our units are always screwy.
Yes.
But so we've got some zero blocks in this prescription. And what we're hoping with those blocks is to really see what that crop can yield at that low nitrogen rate.
Mm-hmm.
And so then if we flip to the third slide, please. What that prescription gives us is nitrogen rate curve for the MERN, or maximum economic rate of nitrogen, which I just learned today is a Ontario only thing, apparently.
We're going to talk about that in a second, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah. But looking at your own farm, trying to determine what the best rate of nitrogen is on your own farm with your own management is really where this kind of project can take us. And so when we're looking at that soil supply, we can see here that on the far left of that graph there, where the actual application was 0.6 gallons per acre, actually yielded 146 bushels per acre. And once we get up to, our normal rate of around 50 gallons, 60 gallons, that's where we max out our yield. And around 48 gallons is where the maxed out the profit. But it's incredibly surprising on zero nitrogen just how much crop can actually come from that.
So, and let's stick with this for a minute because you mentioned this. So it's a great curve, right? That obviously we can build yield, but the second part to this is the profit, right? In that at some point there's a diminishing rate of return on every additional pound of N. And so this shows us sort of where adding extra N may get you a little bit more yield, but does it make you money? So that is the piece of this that I think sometimes I struggle to wrap my head around. I'm glad that other people do the math because my head doesn't want to do that. So so that's that yellow line is essentially our profit per acre.
Yeah, and this is an example of a field that we actually had piloting this project and the software and everything last year. So this is a real scenario with real results. Obviously, we're not sharing the farmer's name or anything, the location, out of privacy, but I think it's kind of surprising that right around his intended rate, what he's actually doing is, of course, pretty close to that, but just gives some level of confidence on my management, my field this year. What's the best rate? And so without something like this, without testing of some kind, it's hard to know what that soil supply is and really what you should be aiming for.
Mm-hmm. There's a question: how was this applied? Was this Y drop, Coulter? What was the actual application for this UAN?
So this was side-dressed with a coulter. So
Okay.
V5, that time frame.
Okay.
So yeah, just kind of your normal side dress.
And so is the idea for like what you laid out in this program is that, like, to me, so long as you've got the capabilities, this should be something that a farmer could do relatively easily, so long as you've got the equipment to do it, to actually do this on farm.
Yeah, and whether it's through this program or on your own or with your agronomist, the key point of that variable rate application is so it's easy to do, so you don't have to be screwing around at the end of the field, changing settings on the pump and all that, because we know that doesn't get done in that case.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can kind of set it up ahead of time, it's so much easier to do.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so now, and we talked about, before we went live tonight, we talked about Mern, and I felt like this was somewhat of an Ontario discussion. I hear about it more here. I'm not sure where that came from. Maybe Pete knows and can share if he's in the comments. Adam, out in Manitoba, Mern is not necessarily something used. I know Colin, what did you say it was? EONR down in maybe some of the corn growing regions of the US. So Adam, I didn't think, and you said that, we don't really have this type of term, but that doesn't mean that, of course, you're not sitting down and figuring out what is the best nitrogen rate based on yield potential, but also economics, because that is incredibly important. So how do you broach that economic component of choosing the right rate for a side dress?
I mean, generally, we have a yield goal in mind. The majority of the corn is fall fertilized up to, I would say, at least 150 bushel for the most part. There are some exceptions to that. So we're front loading a significant amount of nitrogen. And then, I mean, for us, we're on a floodplain. So that all gets stabilized and either deep banded or field cultivated or deep tilled in. If it's along the river where the flooding typically is, we won't put anything down at all. That'll be a spring applied application. But then we basically wait and see what our spring looks like. And we want to know, are we going to have a decent amount of moisture? Are we going to be dry? We are so dependent on our rainfall in this area that generally we'll fertilize for 150 bushels and then we'll wait till this time of year and we'll do the PSMT test and then determine, do we think we're going to get more rain? Where are we at currently for moisture? And then from there, we'll have a discussion about if we want to fertilize for more. So, I mean, economics definitely factor into that. Generally, we kind of average around 150 bushel corn would be an average on farm for us. But if we want to push it, then we're going to wait and see what the weather does.
Mm-hmm. It is, and this has come up a few times on the show, it is a very different world when you don't know if it will rain or not. In Ontario, we are quite blessed that for the most part, we know it will rain, and sometimes maybe too much, but we know that it will. And so it really does change the conversation as to how you're going to address some of these things, nitrogen especially. So that totally makes sense. So Jason Phillips says that Mern came from the winter wheat world, and he got it from John Hurd. Peter says there are lots of terms that all mean the same thing. It's Mern here, or MRTN, a maximum return to nitrogen. But Pete says that John Hurd may have taken it from Ontario. Oh, now we've started a war. We have done Mern since the 90s in Ontario, and I'm pretty sure John Hurd is from Ontario. So there you go. Okay, so whatever it may be, it is this trying to find the ideal nitrogen rate that is going to not cap yield, but also still be economic. Gord Speck-Snyder asked, Colin, will the delta yield protocol give the same results? Because it is kind of similar, right? There is a 0 in there, which would be your delta yield if you added none. So how are they similar, different? How do we sort of decide between the two ways of learning these things?
Yeah, so the main difference is the delta yield. You've got your 0 and non-limiting. This project is kind of a multi-rate, so traditionally much more difficult to do on farm with the multiple different rates. They give pretty similar results. I guess from the research side, I think the data is a little bit better for statistics and that kind of thing, with the multi-rate, and you might be able to pick out some things on where exactly along that curve the most profitable rate will occur. So it's a little bit more data and making it a little bit more valuable in that way, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Producer Jay, let's go to Colin's slide 1, because while we're on this topic of rainfall, so if we knew how much it was going to rain, Adam, we would all be able to relatively easily choose our nitrogen rate and whether or not we should protect it. All sorts of decisions would be easier, but that doesn't mean that it's a slam dunk when you know it's going to rain. So Colin, walk us through this. I love the colors, by the way, very, very bright in summary. What does this tell us about fertilizer responses and rainfall?
So first thing, because it looks nice, means that I didn't make it and I stole
Mm.
this image. So got to give credit where it's due.
Yes. Okay.
But yeah, so what this is at the Elora Research Station in Ontario here. This is 10 years worth of nitrogen trials at the research station. So the one of the key factors at Elora is that it's on a beautiful silt loam soil that is kind of impervious to a lot of the troubles that we face in some of the other parts of the province, where we've got a bit more sand or a bit more clay and some of the things that can go on there. So in this case, we can see if you look at the triangles on that chart, that's where the MERN or the MRTN or the EONR or whatever the best rate of nitrogen is
The best one.
for that individual year is at that triangle. And so we can see there's a pretty decent range from around 160 kgs per hectare up to say 275 or so. So in any one year, it's a little bit difficult to predict at the start of the season. But what what Bill Dean and Caleb Niemeyer and Josh Nozelski, some of their work that they did at Elora was comparing the final yield and the maximum economic rate of nitrogen to the rainfall. And so what they found was rainfall from V5 to V12 in corn at Elora correlated extremely strongly with the final yield and the MERN rate of nitrogen. So essentially, when we get more rain from V5 to V12, that yield goes up and our economic rate of nitrogen goes up. So if we've got a way to determine, how much rain we've gotten, that's the ideal. Of course, it means a late application after V12. Or if you can kind of get a ballpark of, well, here's the rain we've got, maybe up to V6 or V7, and here's the forecast, maybe that helps make it a bit more accurate rather than just going by the same rate you've done, or even something like the corn end calculator in Ontario gives us a bit more real world adjustments to that.
I did not live here in 2012, but I've heard stories of 2012. That was really the last true drought in Ontario, and gosh, does it show up on this chart? So that is quite remarkable. Adam, what this tells me is that the approach that most southern Manitoba corn farmers have is probably the right one, because it sounds to me like you guys just wait to see if it rains, and if it rains, then you add more, and if it doesn't, then you don't.
Yeah, that sums it up.
So all good. Okay, so that does bring us to maybe our next point. When we're talking Sidedress, Adam, are you using any nitrogen enhancement products? Like, are you protecting this nitrogen in some way? What are the conditions that you're going to kind of talk through on whether or not you're going to choose protected nitrogen?
I'm a big believer in nitrogen stabilizers. I mean, we have the potential here to have all kinds of weather. I mean, I keep talking like we're dry, but I mean, really what I'm trying to say is that we have moisture that comes in all sorts of adverse conditions. Like we might have spring flooding, so then fall applied nitrogen should be dual stabilized, with a volatilization product and a leaching product. In season we can have no rain for two months, and then we can have a 4-inch rain event. So if we're top dressing corn, rain's not guaranteed. I mean, you look at the forecast for this week for us, and we're cool, and we have a tenth every day, but I mean, probably not going to get anything. So guys top dressing this week should be putting on an NVPT product at least to prevent volatilization. Leaching would be fine if it would, because that would mean we'd have rain. But yeah, I'm a big believer in that. And even like we have a few guys that are coultering in this area, and just because of how much clay we have in certain fields, we have those furrows rolling up on the discs, and they don't get complete closure. So I've started actually adding nitrogen stabilizer. We'll do like a 3/4 rate to a full rate, depending on what the field looks like. But we just don't get necessarily a nice slicing furrow into that field. We're rolling up chunks and we're not getting coverage. So.
Mm-hmm. Colin, that definitely, I mean, that comes up in conversation here as well, as to, how well that nitrogen gets applied and potentially and sealed back up, and away you go. So what does the conversation look like with growers here when they're deciding on a stabilizer or not?
Yeah, so I think, like you mentioned, Adam, it's kind of two parts. So there's one is, your operation, how are you applying that? So yeah, whether that slot is closed up behind or whether you're wide dropping, whether you're going in ultra early because it looks like we might have rain in the forecast, or you've got the wide drops to go in later, all kind of how early and how well you can put that nitrogen on is a big part of it. But then the risk factor as well. So nitrogen doesn't get lost unless there's something to drive that loss. So being, urea sitting on the soil surface without a rain to get that washed in, a good rain, that's pretty high risk. So if you've top dressed urea, then forecast looks like we might be dry for a while. Well, that's probably your best bet for a urease inhibitor to prevent that volatilization. If you're applying it, knifing it in on heavy clay soil, and we've got 2 inches of rain in the forecast for the next 2 days, then, well, there's a chance that might get waterlogged conditions if we get that big storm, and maybe we should be applying a nitrification inhibitor to prevent denitrification. So it's all kind of about that risk, and specifically that risk in relation to your operation, how you're putting that nitrogen, where it's going, all that kind of stuff.
Mark asked about the ROI of a stabilizer and or protector. Adam, for the most part, how do you assess the cost versus benefit on these products?
Well, I mean, if you're factoring in, a pound of N costing between 75 cents to $1, and you're putting $50 down, and it costs $8 to protect that $50, I think the economics speaks for itself. For us, we just generally don't have a guaranteed rain in the forecast. I mean, I have the odd grower that'll say, it's going to rain tomorrow. Let's put some N down. I would say 7, 8 times out of 10, it doesn't rain the next day. And then we're waiting a week for that rain. So for me, that $8 or the $10 you spend on stabilizer per acre, I think that's money well spent to protect your product.
Peter wants to know, do you buy into Josh Nozelski's CEC decision for volatilization? Peter, I would like you to cite which paper you're discussing. Just kidding. So Josh has over 25 CEC, risk of loss is extremely low. Colin, are you familiar with this work? Do you buy it or not? And is this going to cause a fight next time you see Josh?
Yeah, so I've seen Josh's work on that, and yeah, I think there's absolutely some definite value to that. I think it does come with a bit of a caveat, though, depending on how you're applying that nitrogen and what that whole operation looks like under under the right conditions, the right application, I think there's very little volatilization risk. But like I mentioned, if you're top dressing urea instead of knifing in 28, there's still that those conditions to deal with above the ground that, well, we still need that rain to get it in to keep that volatilization low. So I think in a lot of cases, if we can get it placed right in the soil, then there's very little volatilization loss in those heavier soils.
Mm-hmm. Adam, you're nodding your head. When I think Red River Valley, I think I get taller as I walk across the field because the mud just sticks and I just get taller and taller and taller. So I mean, how does the CEC of a soil factor into this decision?
I mean, we are generally a heavier clay loam. The closer you get to the river, the higher that value goes. So for us, I mean, like Colin said too, waterlogged soils would be a major concern for us in season if we are in a wet year. So that plays into that decision as well. Our CECs are typically higher. So
yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Okay, we've got a few more things I want to cover, and there's some good questions about biological sources of N. So how do we work manure questions into this, also cover crop release, etc. But Producer Jay, if you would, let's go to our last read of the night, and then when we come back, we'll post that information for the off-calf knowledge sharing event while we're going about our last few questions. So Producer Jay, if you would run the read. Thank you to our show sponsors, Wheat Pete's Word, the Corn School, and the Farm Safety Roundup. Keeping safety front of mind is all about communication. With agriculture expertise to help keep farmers, their families, and their workers safe, Farm Safety Roundup is a podcast series focused on important conversations with a team of ag specialists at Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. Check out Farm Safety Roundup on YouTube or download from wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so Producer Jay, if you could put up Margaret May's, I think it's her email. So for anyone in Ontario, if you've got off-calf funding and need that knowledge sharing event credit, let Margaret know that you took in the show. Zip her an email. We'll leave this up for a little bit, and make sure you get in touch shortly, and she'll get you all signed up for that. Okay. Adam, do you work with a lot of clients that have manure in the background or in active rotation or just in the histories?
I have a couple clients that have hog barns, so we deal with it on a couple fields. But generally in our area, that's not a widespread source of fertilizer.
No. And there are a lot fewer hog barns than there used to be. So the question of manure, though, I mean, we love it. We know that it has a long-term legacy on the impact on a field and nutrient availability. We try to work it into our nutrient budgets as to what it will provide, but it's not necessarily uniform, and sometimes it can surprise us. So, Colin, thinking about right now in Ontario on the numbers that you've pulled, how has manure in the mix in the backgrounds, how has that been impacting numbers, and are you surprised by them?
So I think, like we mentioned off the hop here, the nitrate tests that are coming back, they seem to be quite variable from the ones that I've kind of seen. A lot of the cases, the manure, we would expect, just like the soil supply by itself, to be relatively low due to how cool it was and the I'd say the relative dryness that we had, even though the soil stayed wet. In a lot of cases, they're actually maybe well above where we would expect. So I think manure, it's complex at the best of times. Whether you're using a PSNT to kind of gauge where that supply is, I think that's kind of the best case scenario for whether it's more nitrogen from that manure than normal or less. Otherwise, I think you've got to have a manure test and put it into pounds per acre that we'd expect to mineralize is kind of a best guess. We've got a tool on AgriSuite the organic amendment calculator. That's a very useful way to kind of make sense of that manure test. The rate that you're applying, when you're applying it, whether you're working it in or leaving it on the surface, whether you got cover crops, all that kind of stuff. It gives a pretty good indication of what we might expect. That number is going to go up or down based on what the weather does, what the microbes do, all that kind of thing. But way to get a best guess, anyways, is with that tool.
So Peter asked then, Colin, if the PSNT number comes back high, would you suggest cutting the N application back, 10, 20, 30 pounds? How do you sort of make that call on if you cut and by how much?
Yeah, and I think that's probably a pretty good number to go by, 20, 30 pounds. If we look at some of the data from Alora and other places, if we're within 30 pounds of that MERN value, that ideal nitrogen rate, we're within $10 an acre of profit at the end of the day. So I think, having a high testing soil in relation to that same scenario. So if you've applied manure in previous years, testing that compared to this year, if it's testing high, I would say absolutely cut back a bit. And my recommendation, regardless of whether you're using manure, regardless of whether you're using a PSNT test, is to try a strip, cut back 30 pounds, try a strip, add 30 pounds, just to really test where we're at and, fine tune, are you applying the right rate, or maybe I could go a bit higher or a bit lower. So I think there's room to test it no matter what you're doing.
Adam, so you mentioned hog manure. That makes me think phosphorus and copper, but obviously there's more in there than that. But how does that play into, the decision of N on corn? Is it typical that you would either pull back, or how does it factor in with all the other things that manure offers?
So in our area, they're mostly farrowing barns, so you don't get a lot of nutrients out of it. There's a lot of water that gets put on the fields. So generally, we'll fertilize 50 to 75% of our normal yield goal. It's gotten a bit better, I would say, with the applicators. The equipment's gotten better. They've upgraded. They're able to mix the ponds a bit better, and they can test as it's actually pumping onto the fields. And the equipment's gotten better in terms of what's what I'm looking for here? Tracking the gallons per acre. So as long as I get that application data back from them, I can kind of even come up with a map, and we'll make a VR map in some cases and fill in, triangles of the field that are under fertilized. So we've started to do more of that. And then we'll also go in season and do the PSNT tests and just see kind of if we need to top up as well, depending on when the fertilizer is applied. If it's applied in fall, then we'll do that. If it's applied in spring, well, then we have to wait. So,
now, Adam, I'm not sure how much cover cropping is happening in your area. So, Colin, I'll go to you on this, but Adam, by all means, jump in if you'd like. The question of cover crops often comes up as far as trying to determine when those cover crops are going to release back, if they've been used to try and hold nitrogen or hold nutrients in place, timing that for when it may be released. How do cover crops complicate or make this easier as far as what to decide on an N rate?
Well, you could have just left it at complicate, and we could have left it at that. But yeah, they definitely it really depends on the cover crop species, whether you're using a legume that's kind of that nitrogen producer, or whether you're looking at a cereal, oats or rye or what have you, or mixes of any number of different species as to when that's going to release nitrogen, whether it's going to release a lot, or with the case of cereals, especially if they get too big and too growthy in the spring, they can tie up a lot of that nitrogen initially. Comes back, I think, long term, but it's kind of that whole how much is there and how much cycling can you afford to utilize.
Yeah, to wait for.
Yes.
And I think that, right, like that is part of the observation. So Mark observes that the PSNTs are showing we need to apply manure after wheat and not cover crop it, which, and then there's way more available to the following year's corn. But you do have to weigh sort of what you're trying to achieve with your cover crop, what the bigger risks are, and then recognize that longer term there may be benefits to having that cover crop, but you have to be able to wait. And actually, producer Jay, if you would, I think it's Colin's slide 4. I think we've actually got a look at some long-term cover crop. So Laura's work, what can you tell us about what some of this work is showing as far as, and what does long-term mean, I guess is my question.
So the first caveat with this is it's on a pretty beautiful sandy loam soil at Ridgetown.
Gosh darn.
It's in kind of a less conventional rotation than we've got through most of Ontario and much of the Western Canada as well, with some vegetables in it. But what this is showing, I think she's on year 12 or
Yeah, that
15
sounds about
maybe
right.
of
Yeah.
of the long-term cover cropping. But essentially it's a vegetable corn rotation. So every other year the plots have corn. The fields are cover cropped, or the individual plots are cover cropped or not, with not even a legume like clover, using oats or radish, that kind of thing. And then when she puts the corn in, she puts just the starter on and then no more nitrogen. So on the left hand side there, it's yeah, about a foot and a half, 2 feet taller. Looks good and green and healthy with 30 pounds of nitrogen on, compared to the plot on the right that also has 30 pounds of nitrogen, but without that long-term cover crop. So in this case, she's getting fantastic yields out of these plots, well above 200 bushel in where that's cover cropped, and you can see dead on where that long-term cover crop has come into play. So I think just with this specific example, there's a lot more of that nitrogen that's cycling over time, and with the rotation, obviously that helps a bit, keeping that nitrogen a bit more available to the corn. If you had corn on cornfield, you're not going to see quite that same cycling because there's that much more residue to break down. But
That's right.
just kind of yeah, gives an indication that that those cover crops, they do cycle nitrogen, and it's more of a case of how it works in the rotation, how it works in the management, and all that kind of stuff.
And I mean, to this point, and I think that's what a lot of farmers and researchers as well, and extension people are trying to sort of figure out is some of the impacts of these things, like manure, frankly, are very long term, and it can be hard to see those differences year to year or how to manage for them year to year. And to that point of, do you add manure and not cover crop? But maybe you want to put that cover crop on there to hold those nutrients to cycle. You just can't count on it being released the very next year. So yeah, so I mean that's always a good question. All right, okay, we are out of time. This has been a lot of fun. I have slowly been losing the light, but I have not melted, and so that is fantastic. That's a win in my books, everybody, for sure. Now, okay, so here we are, well into June. Last question, Adam, what will keep you busy over the next week? What will you be busy doing?
I will be staging for cereal fungicide. That'll be this week, and then spraying for dry bean. That'll be the rest of my week.
That's a good one. I like it. Colin, what are you going to be up to?
Up in 2 weeks' time, we've got diagnostic days at
That's
University of
right.
Guelph Ridgetown campus. So that's kind of my
Soon.
overarching theme for the next couple weeks. So if you're in Ontario, I'd highly suggest getting registered. It's going to be great as always.
I have never actually been. but our Burn Tobin goes pretty sure every year. So I know I've never been. It's sad, but it's very far away. Ontario's a big place. Okay, Adam, Colin, thank you so much. Again, anyone who is looking for that KSE for your off-calf project, zip Margaret May an email and make sure you get that. Next week, we're actually not going to have a show on the 30th. We're taking Monday off because the July 1 is the next day. But the week after July 7th, everybody come on back. We're going to have a fantastic discussion on see and spray, green on green, brown on green, spot spraying, etc. So we've got Dr. Tom Wolf will be joining us for that one. So that's July 7th, 8 p.m. Eastern. Join us. And thank you to everybody in the comments and for joining and for your great questions. Stay cool, everybody. Cheers.